It's great to be here with you tonight. For me, it's a solemn occasion. It's 9/11. It reminds me of everything that happened that day and how difficult it was, and how it changed a lot of things. It's one of the three biggest events in my lifetime, for sure. Moon landing being another one, and so what I thought I needed to do today is to come in here and not only give you some background on what 9/11 really was and why it really happened, but also to cut out the BS, the bullshit about what didn't happen, why the buildings really came down. There is so much garbage out there from so many stupid people who don't understand a thing about science and physics and engineering, including people with PhDs, that I just can't take it anymore. And if you're one of the 9/11 nutbags that thinks that particle beams were used to bring down the towers or something, I'm going to blow your shit out of the water today, okay? Sorry, but you're not going to survive this experience. So if you want to hold on to your ridiculous 9/11 conspiracy theory shield, and what about building number 7? Well, I'm going to tell you what about building number 7. So if you accept all of these crazy conspiracy theories, I'm going to blow your shit up today. So just fair warning, you probably don't want to stick around for this. But I'm going to tell you the truth. That's what this show is about. That's why I call it Tell the Truth Wednesday. And you might be able to tell I'm a little intense about this. There was a reason 9/11 had to happen. It has nothing to do with the garbage that you hear from all kinds of people, including people like Jordan, who should know better. These people they should listen to me about what really happened and how the towers came down and what the reasons really were. So I'm going to educate you today. I need to get into it right away. I don't have a ton of time because my brother, I think, is coming out to do his show afterwards. So I just want to bang through this and get to questions, because I'm sure there's going to be questions, things I'm not going to answer. But trust me, I can't explain them. I'm pretty sure I can explain every single thing. Keep in mind as we go through this, I'm a structural engineer. I grew up as an aerospace structural engineer. I understand a lot of the concepts that we're going to be talking about here. So let us get going here. Again, I just want to double check so I can. It's really weird. On my other YouTube thing, it takes forever for my feed to come up. Don't get it. Oh, there it is live now. Okay, click on that. That way I can check on the chat. Okay, so I am going to share my screen. And we are going to go into the slideshow. Again, as always, thank you. If you like the show, you may not like me after this, but if you like the show, please like and subscribe. Tell your friends about it. Let's get me up to 100,000 subscribers so I can buy a Porsche. Porsche is what I prefer to call it. We're not going to deal with anything in any of these books today, including my novel Lightbringer and my latest book, The Triangle. None of this stuff is going to be covered. I am considering writing Ancient Aliens and the Deep State, and 9/11 may be a chapter in that book, but we shall see. Okay, all I'm here to do is offer you the truth. Nothing more than that. That's all I can do, is tell you the truth. So get ready, because here comes the truth about 9/11. The fact is that 9/11 has nothing to do with the Pentagon hiding $2.3 trillion for secret space programs. It has nothing to do with the Jews, the Israelis. It has nothing to do with people trying to take out insurance policies to make money off the Twin Towers. Look, I'm sorry, every building in New York City, every building in every city is insured. There's nothing unusual about that. It's not about Bush and Cheney. Freya, thank you for the super chat. It's not about any of this stuff. What it's about is the bankruptcy of the United States of America. And I'm going to try to get through this very quickly. In the United States, our country was formed on the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776, was the founding of our nation with the Declaration of Independence. At that time, it was founded as a republic. It was signed by everybody, including John Hancock. It had very specific words that were capitalized. You should pay attention to those words. It will give you a better understanding of the document. But because of that, we went to war with the Crown of England, and our union was formed under the Articles of Confederation, which basically laid out the rules under which the United States would survive and prosper, grow, survive, and prosper. They were very simple because the United States was set up as a republic, not a democracy. So the Revolutionary War took place. Washington crossed the Potomac. There were battles back and forth between the Redcoats. And by the way, if Redskins is an insult, then there shouldn't be a football team called Redskins. Is Redcoats also an insult? I don't know. We called each other names during war times of war. The Revolutionary War was fought. It went back and forth. Eventually, Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown, and the United States, including the Betsy Ross flag, was born with that victory. Now, in reality, Cornwallis did not truly surrender. What really happened is that the United States government, the new government, and the Crown of England came to a financial arrangement, a post-war financial arrangement in which the 13 colonies were given their freedom, and everything that the United States needed to govern was placed under another document called the Constitution. The Constitution stands for constitutor. A constitutor is somebody who secures the debt of another person. So what it actually is a financial document where we signed up to the Crown of England and promised them that in return for the property of our federal government, we got to go our own way with the promise that we would pay back our war debt at some point, which the Crown of England chose to secure. The Constitution was ratified in 1789. However, the United States was not able or not willing, the individual states were not willing, 13 colonies, to pay back their war debt to the Rothschilds Bank of France and various other entities. So the Crown of England paid it for us in return for our federal lands, which is one of the reasons why the US government is always trying to acquire more land so that they can pay off and keep paid off these creditors that we have, who are, at least at that time, were the Crown of England. So that put the United States from its founding almost, from 1789, into international bankruptcy. The Constitution is a document of international bankruptcy, is what it actually is. So in a republic, in a democracy, the majority rules, everyone participates in every decision. This is what the left, the political left, is trying to get us to be. A place where the mob rules, there's no protection of individual rights, no protection of property rights, not practical for large countries. It always ends in turbulence and violence, as opposed to a republic where we're governed by elected representatives who are supposed to be responsible. We're governed by an established set of laws, individual rights and property rights are protected, and you avoid the tyranny and mobocracy, which we are descending into in the United States right now. That's what we're supposed to be, but once we signed away our rights, we actually became a democracy and no longer a republic. What was immediately then founded was the Central Bank of the United States, the original main bank of the US, which had a 20-year charter from 1791 to 1811. Well, what happened in 1811? Well, the President of the United States chose not to continue the Bank of the United States, and he closed it down, which led to the War of 1812, where the British came back and said, oh, no, you don't, because we're funneling all of your money through that bank to pay off the debts that you owe us. So they invaded, they took over, they burned Washington, they held the president hostage. But what most people don't appreciate about the War of 1812 is that the first place that the British seized in Washington was not the White House, and it was not the Capitol, it was not anything else, it was the courthouse. Why? Because the courthouse is where all of the records of land titles are held. So they seized the titles to the land and wouldn't give it back until we agreed to reestablish a Bank of the United States, which we did. And once again, the US was brought under a central bank. So 70 years after the initial bankruptcy of the United States was the year 1859. Well, what happened in the year 1859? The North came back to the new states, the South, and said, okay, we have this war debt that we haven't paid for 70 years, and we've got to pay it now. So will you pay it for us or with us? And the Southern states said, screw you. We're not going to pay that. It's not our debt. It's your debt. We're going to form our own country. So again, the European banks, the Rothschilds and the Crown of England said, oh, no, you don't. And they put Abraham Lincoln up for president. They drummed up the fake issue of slavery, which was already being ended by international law, and the American Civil War started. It went on for several years. It eventually was decided. Lincoln was assassinated. But the important thing to remember is that the Confederacy never surrendered. The Confederacy never ceased to exist. Lee surrendered his sword to Grant at Appomattox, but The Confederacy never ceased to exist, and it still exists today as a legal entity. The question is why, and I don't know the answer to that yet, but I'm looking into it. So that led to the 13th Amendment being ratified, which basically was not so much to free the slaves as it was to make it possible to make every citizen of the United States a slave. So what happened in 1859 was that after having lost the sovereignty of our federal government, we then lost the sovereignty of our state governments. That was the collateral we had to put out in exchange for the debt once again being discharged for 70 years. And it's important to understand that when you go into bankruptcy, if you go into personal bankruptcy, your debts are not forgiven. They're simply discharged or set off for 70 years on the assumption that you'll be dead by the time it comes around again. True story. In the course of the case of corporate entities like the United States, that doesn't happen. So the next time that was going to come around was going to be 1929. So in 1909, 20 years before, the concept of the Federal Reserve banking system was created at Jekyll Island amongst a meeting of heavy bankers and industry members, captains of industry. The Federal Reserve was created as a replacement. And so in 1929, of course, the stock market crashed. And when the stock market crashed, the solution was, well, now we're going to take away all your gold. So again, they took away the individual sovereignty. They replaced the gold and silver as real money with the birth certificate. The birth certificate was created. It is also a financial instrument. And the bottom line is that they sold us. They sold our bodies, our lives, and our productive energy and replaced gold and silver, real money, and a lloydial title, which means that if you buy a house with gold, nobody can ever take that house away from you. They took all that away. It made you use fiat currencies and basically said, okay, now the individual American has lost his sovereignty in return for discharging this debt, which we couldn't pay. The stock market crashed, and they had to figure a way out of the economic downturn that had been created by this new financial system. The answer to that was, of course, World War II. So they pumped up Hitler. This is, again, the gold, silver, and so forth being taken away. They pumped up Hitler. They got the Nazi war machine going. They started World War II. The Germans invaded Europe. They conquered much of it, including France. There's Der Fuhrer in front of the Eiffel Tower. The United States was brought into the war through Pearl Harbor, which was an event that, you know, Roosevelt knew about. But the Germans ran into trouble when they went into Russia. They were beaten back by the Russians. They attempted to once again seize the initiative in the Battle of the Bulge. They lost that, and World War II ended. And Japan, of course, was conquered as well by the United States in the Pacific Theater. We dropped the bomb on them and put an end to World War II. And what we were able to do then was to once again create, basically all the war debt was paid through the creation. Here's some other shots of Hiroshima. The war debt was paid through the creation of the German Deutschmark and the Japanese yen. These were currencies that were printed by the United States Treasury. Gee, do you think we had a few of those ourselves? It was all paper money anyway. So what they did is that after 10 years or so, they revalued these currencies from, let's say in the case of the Deutschmark, to being worth fractions of a cent to three or four Deutschmarks on the dollar. And anybody holding a million Deutschmarks, which were worth about $50 before the revaluation, the next day it was worth 3 million American dollars. And guess what? Everybody got rich. And the war debt was all paid for. The Marshall Plan was paid for. The rebuilding of Europe, and it got us out of the Depression and into the post-World War II era. Okay, so flash forward to 1991. Iraq invades Kuwait, and this is seen as an awesome opportunity to, again, start a war. We had Operation Desert Storm, where Saddam Hussein was thrown out of Kuwait, and guess what? The nation of Kuwait collapsed. Their currency was seized by the Iraqis, so the old Kuwaiti currency was basically discontinued, and then the United States printed the new Kuwaiti dinar, and in 1998, that was revalued. All the war debt was paid for from Operation Desert Storm. A bunch of private individuals got rich, and miraculously, the U.S. suddenly went from a budget deficit to a budget surplus. I wonder how that happened. So when this all took place, all the bankers knew that 1999 was going to be 70 years after 1929, and something was going to have to be dealt with. Again, the bankruptcy was coming up again. So how is it going to be dealt with this time? And there are a number of things that were done, but the answer was we have to go back to the tried and true. We have to get a war started. So the worldwide war on terrorism was conceived in 1999 as a way to once again pay off the debt from 1789 that the United States had never paid. Now, in reality, this is all paper money at this point. So basically, the United States could mint a 0.999 silver, 1 ounce gold coin in the denomination of $22 trillion or whatever the debt is, walk it up to the Federal Reserve and say, there, the debt's paid, you're closed, and we no longer need you as a central bank. That could literally be done. That's why nobody cares about the deficit of the debt anymore, because it can be paid off that simply. It's all fake paper, but in the books, the statistics, as you look at the numbers, it has to be accounted for somehow, some way. So we're still living in this fiat world, but the plan then became to start another war, get the United States heavily involved in it, and do the currency thing again. So in 2003, we had, or 1999, we had 9/11, which got us onto a war footing and started the war in 2003. So 9/11 was required in order for us to get onto a war footing. The United States had no stomach for war. We weren't interested in any of this stuff. But an event like this, which was shattering to our psyche, would galvanize us into war, and the worldwide international bankers knew that. So the whole thing was either staged, arranged, or allowed to happen. I don't know who was behind it at all, but it may have been, I know who executed it, which is a bunch of pissed off Muslims who hijacked airplanes. So that led to the 2003 Iraq War, where we went in and we finished the job. We're now going to do the same currency thing with the Iraqi dinar. George W. Bush landed on the deck of the carrier, which was pretty impressive for a president, said, you know, mission accomplished, and the Iraq War is going to pay for itself. Well, of course it's going to pay for itself, because guess what? We're going to revalue the Iraqi currency, and guess who's printing all that? You know how the game works. It's worked that way before. So that was the plan all along. In order to get us there, though, the United States had to go to the UN. They had to say Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, chemical, biological, and possibly even nuclear weapons, which they did. When Colin Powell showed these pictures, these pictures are real satellite pictures of various institutes, various scientific labs where the Iraqis were working on and producing chemical and biological agents. Here's pictures of the buses and trucks moving in and out. They would come in the day before UN inspectors, they'd load up and they'd leave. The day after the inspectors had come by, they'd come back and unload whatever they were. What do people think that they were loading and unloading? I mean, the Iraqi Republican Guard supply of Krispy Kremes for the week in those labs? But before the war started, the rumor was spread around the news that Iraq's WMD had been moved. Well, where had they been moved? Well, the word was they were moved first to Syria, where Assad was in charge, Saddam's buddy, both Ba'ath Party leaders, and was then buried in Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley. That's what I remember distinctly hearing these reports on mainstream news media before the invasion ever took place. So we invaded, there were no WMDs. We didn't find them in Iraq because they weren't there. They'd been moved to the Bekaa Valley, and you want proof that they were in the Bekaa Valley? Guess what? What did Israel do in 2005? They invaded Lebanon using rockets being fired into Israel as an excuse. They drove all the way up into the Bekaa Valley, stopping at Baalbek. They stayed there for about a week, and then they withdrew, because they knew these chemical and biological weapons were there, that they might be used on Israel. They went in, they took them out, they cleaned them up, and then they went home. So 9/11 was the precursor to all this. And what's raged is the controversy over what exactly happened. And there's all these silly rumors and silly ideas and things that are put out there by the conspiracy community, trying to get people to not believe the official story on 9/11. Well, I'm here to tell you, you should believe it, because it's true. There was a conspiracy around 9/11. It has to do with the 1999 bankruptcy of the United States. And as far as I know, there's nobody in the community, in the conspiracy community, the Q community, who knows anything about the international bankruptcies of the U.S., understands a thing about this, or is talking about this. So guess what? You got me, and I'm going to talk about it for you. So the question is, how did they do it? Well, you know, they got a bunch of people to fly into buildings. They convinced some nutty Muslims to hijack airplanes, fly them into buildings, and start 9/11. Let's face reality. If the buildings hadn't come down, if they had simply just been attacked with the planes, they would have had to have been blown up and torn down. the same thing would have happened. We still would have gone to war. So I don't even think necessarily that bringing the buildings down was even part of the plan. But there's all this garbage out there. Oh, Bush was warned about 9/11. No, he wasn't. This is the presidential PDB that was issued, where it said we've not been able to corroborate some of the more sensational threat reporting, saying that bin Laden wanted to hijack a U.S. aircraft to gain the release of the blind sheik and other U.S.-held extremists. So that's not true. There's all these rumors that, oh, yeah, Bush was in on it. Well, I don't know if Bush knew about it. I tend to think he didn't know specifically what was going to happen. But this idea that the PDB says that he was warned about the air attacks, no, he wasn't. And by the way, didn't Al Gore in 1996 declare all the airports were super secure and nobody could ever be no plane could ever be hijacked again because of all the new measures the Clinton administration put in? Well, that worked out really well. So to understand the engineering and the science behind this, you have to understand how the Twin Towers were constructed. They were steel frame buildings, highly unusual, revolutionary for the day. That's the only way they could be built as tall as they were. The Empire State Building was a concrete structure, and that basically, the Empire State Building is about the limit that you can reach for concrete type structures because they're just too heavy. But with steel frame construction, which was revolutionary in the 1970s, you can go higher than that. What's important to understand is that this exterior lattice work on the Twin Towers, the four sides, carried a significant amount of the structural load, like up to 20% of the structural load of the buildings as they rose into the sky. All this stuff out here is carrying a lot of the weight. It's almost like what's called the monocoque design in aerospace. You know, the skin of the aircraft itself is part of the structural stiffness of the vehicle. So all of this stuff was part of the load bearing of the actual complete structure. There were two central columns, and then there were this exterior lattice work. So again, you can see it also has this weird, slightly Arabic-looking style to it, which in retrospect I don't like very much. And when the buildings collapsed, some of it still stood because this is all steel. So what happened on 9/11 is that 4 airplanes were hijacked. 1 flew into the Pentagon, 1 crashed in a field in Pennsylvania, and 2 were flown into the Twin Towers. The first one was flown into WTC-1, fairly high up. It severed through 6 floors. And the other one was flown into WTC-2 a few minutes later. Now, people like to say, oh, well, there's such BS because they found a passport from one of the pilots way far away. Well, okay, you know what else they found? They found the engines of the second aircraft and the landing gear and fuselage sections up to 400 and 500 yards away from the crash. My dad was on Boeing crash teams back in the 1970s and 1980s. He went to crash sites, and it was routine to find watches, shoes, paperwork, passports, hundreds of yards away from the impact zones. Because in these chaotic disasters, stuff gets flown at high speed out of the aircraft. And sometimes randomly, it just doesn't hit anything or get burned, or get caught in the fireball. So a lot of people question whether this really happened or whether or not it was sufficient to bring the towers down. So again, this is the pattern. These are the 4 aircraft. Here's a shot of the second airplane hitting the second tower, WTC-1. Notice the aircraft is at an angle. They were taught to do this because what they would do then is they would sever the steel frame structure on multiple floors. The first impact, which was higher up, went through about 6 floors. I think this one went through about 9 or 10, as I understand it. So what happened was, yeah, the 77th floor to the 85th floor, so 8 floors, the 93rd to the 99th, so 6 floors. So these 2 impacts took place. The planes were at an angle, and they also cut through, let me see if I've got one more shot. They also cut through basically 3 of the 4 sides of the square buildings. This face was cut through, the side face was cut through, and the back face was cut through on both buildings. So what you've lost at this point is you've lost basically 75% of the exterior load-bearing members. The central cores were badly damaged or severed. And you've now got tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and concrete pushing down on those badly damaged sections of the building. The same thing, a similar thing happened in the Pentagon, where a plane hit the Pentagon on the side, penetrated 3 or 4 of the walls, the rings of the Pentagon, and caused extensive damage. So the fires then started, and they burned for an hour or so before the buildings collapsed. The second building that was hit, building WTC2, was the first to collapse because the strike was lower and there was more weight on top. So it collapsed first. And the building that was hit first, WTC1, collapsed a few minutes later. So it's not at all exceptional to me that these buildings came down. As soon as I saw the damage that had been done and understood what was happening, I knew the built towers were going to come down. I told my wife they were going to come down. So it's not amazing to me that they came down at all. What's amazing is that they stood as long as they did, because what you're looking at here is major structural damage. Again, around 3 sides of this load-bearing structure on the outside of the building. The central columns are damaged, and you've got fires burning inside. Now, what will fires do to steel? They will weaken it. So when the buildings collapse, they often say, oh, they fell in their own footprint. No, they didn't. Again, damage was found. Debris was found from the 2 towers hundreds of yards away from the center of the 2 towers. All over that area, ground zero was plastered with debris from the collapse of the towers, even though, yes, they collapsed basically straight down. Here's an aerial shot of some of the debris several days later. It's all over the place. And again, here are the footprints of some of the other buildings. And this is after a lot of it's already been cleaned up. Notice there's cranes and stuff here. Look at all this debris from the 2 towers coming down. So again, that's a myth. Here's a shot of WTC7, which was badly damaged. This is WTC4, which is right underneath it. It's completely destroyed, and there are actually some pieces of the World Trade Center Tower #1, I think it was, that came straight down on top of it. So again, the argument comes out from the conspiracy theorists that steel beams melt at 2,750 degrees and jet fuel burns at 1,500 degrees. And the WTC was designed to withstand the impact from a Boeing 707, which causes 10% more. First of all, that claim that it causes 10% more damage than the 767's WTC is bull. There's no support for that at all. There was some consideration about an aircraft hitting it, but they were thinking that the same thing might happen as happened to the Empire State Building when a slow-moving prop plane ran into the Empire State Building in fog. They thought it was a possibility, so they kind of thought, well, we should look and see if our structure will survive that. So a nearly empty 707 coming in for a landing to LaGuardia or JFK is not the same thing as a 350,000-pound ton aircraft filled with passengers and fuel hitting the building at 400 some miles an hour. The amount of kinetic energy involved is off the scale and could not be accounted for in the design process. So here's what happened. The important thing to understand is that, again, the steel doesn't need to melt. This idea that it needs to melt is absolutely ludicrous. Because what's going on is that you've got these building cores, the perimeter columns, and the steel frames supporting it. But when you have the damage, the perimeter columns are severed, so there's no longer any support there. The inner cores are damaged, and then you've got these fires raging at anywhere from 1,500 to 2,300 degrees. Now, what happens then is that the heat basically travels through the metal and begins to weaken all these other crossbeam supports. Now, they don't have to weaken by very much because, remember, you've already lost 30, 40, 50% of the structural integrity of the building, of the design. So they begin to sag under the heat and the damage. And there's nothing underneath them to support them. And you've got hundreds of thousands of tons of steel and concrete above them, pushing down. So they don't have to melt. The steel doesn't have to completely be melted. It just has to weaken by about 10 to 15%. And if you look at the numbers, steel of the type that was used in the Twin Towers under those kinds of conditions will weaken and warp in about half an hour. Again, it's not surprising the buildings came down. It's a miracle they survived at all. So the perimeter columns get pulled inward. They begin to sag. They begin to warp. You can actually see that in some of the videos. the structural cross beams sag, and then the whole thing begins to crash down and pancake. And then what happens is, as it comes down, a pressure wave develops in front of it. People are trying to say, oh, there's explosions from the bombs that took place. No, what's happening is that there's a leading pressure wave as these floors pancake one on top of the other on top of the other. And then the inertia of that collapse is going to increase the speed at which the floors collapse, because every time another floor collapses, you've added another couple 10,000 tons of steel and concrete to this huge debris pile. And then stuff begins to hit each other and bounce off each other and fly out in all directions. And you have a complete increasing momentum and inertia that is going to just crush that building flat in, as we saw, about 30 seconds. So again, these are not bombs going off, you imbeciles. This is simply a pressure wave being generated by the collapse of the building. So then the next thing I get is, well, what about building number 7? Building number 7 was not hit by an airplane. 2 airplanes took out 3 buildings. Well, yeah, they did. And here's exactly what happened. When the Twin Tower, I think it was WTC-1, the second one to go down, nearest building number 7 collapsed. It not only wiped out WTC-4, as we saw, but debris flew off as it collided with itself and struck building number 7, which is only a few hundred yards away. You can walk the distance from this Twin Tower over to where WTC-7 once stood, and it's only a couple hundred yards. It's not very far away. And as we saw from the debris field pictures, building 7 was right smack in the middle of this debris. So this is actual screenshots of the CNN coverage from 9/11. You can see as it collapses that stuff begins to fly off in all directions around the building. It did not collapse in its own footprint. It went considerably around the actual footprint of the building. Here's some big pieces flying off from the debris. And again, go watch the video. Go to CNN, 9/11 live coverage, and fast forward to 5 in the afternoon when building number 7 goes down. And they will show you, well, collapse of this building. Here again, here's big chunks of debris being flung out in all directions, aimed towards building number 7. Here's a big piece right there, if you watch the video that comes up. Here's a gigantic piece of the structure that bends over a big spar. And again, you can see the outer lattice work of WTC-1, I believe, still sticking up. This is flung out towards building number 2, or building number 7. And again, more and more pieces from this perspective, you can see that stuff is being flung towards building number 7. But we don't have to rely on this, because guess what? There were people in other buildings in the World Trade Center, and they could see the other side of building number 7, the side that faced the former Twin Towers. And they took video, and guess what? In that video, you see a huge gash on the inside of the building. You can see that there are floors that are crumpled. Building number 7. This gash goes from the base of the building more than halfway, about halfway up, like halfway up building number 7. This is all from debris from WTC-1 hitting and damaging the building. And a lot of it was red hot, and then it started fires in building number 7. This, by the way, is the penthouse structure. So it's on the side where the penthouse structure resides. So then what happens is the heavy damage in WTC-7, some of it above, some of it below, is damaging to the structure. Again, steel frame structure, 47 stories high. The fires inside begin to weaken the steel structure inside. There were people reporting for hours before WTC-7 went down that it was also going to collapse because of the extensive damage. And then the collapse of WTC-7 from the same perspective actually begins at the bottom of the building. Not the top, but the bottom, where the most damage is. And there are no explosions. Again, go watch this video. You can find it on YouTube. It's not a problem. I just found it today. So what happens is that you have this penthouse structure. The damage is on this side, on the opposite side of WTC-7. The penthouse collapses first because you have the structural failure at the base. This whole back end of the building comes down because of the weight of the penthouse. It comes down and it pulls the rest of the building down with it. Here's the first screenshot. You begin to see the deformation and collapse of the penthouse structure. It then disappears, and then the rest of the building gets dragged down with it. Notice the deformation in WTC-7. The other thing you'll notice is there are no explosions of any kind. If this was controlled demolition, there would be explosions, and there are none. So the Pentagon, people say, well, there's no indication a plane hit the building. Well, yes, there is. Here's the Pentagon damage a couple days later. This area right here is where the plane hit, came in at an angle. The wings went in right here. They were severed and basically vaporized, and the rest of the aircraft went through all the way through to ring number 3, shot right through the building. There's no video, supposedly, of a plane, so it had to be a missile. Okay, the security cameras that were used in 2001 had a frame rate of 10 frames a second. Today's best cameras are 30 frames a second or more. So basically, every 10th of a second, you caught a shot of something out there. Now, the reason that it's hard to see this is because this particular plane is flying at about 400 miles an hour. It's basically almost skimming along the ground at this point. And in a 10th of a second, it goes from being visible just on the lawn or above the lawn to the next frame where it strikes the building. This is the 757 skimming along the ground. Here's the tail, here's the fuselage. Guess what? American Airlines had silver fuselages. This is not a missile, this is the aircraft. Again, here's a shot of the plane. The next frame is the impact. Here's the damage that was left. This is all airplane. So people say that there's no debris in the Pentagon, no aircraft debris. Yes, there is. The plane was basically vaporized into small chunks because there were all these vertical support struts in the building that tore the thing apart as it traveled through the steel reinforced concrete structure of the Pentagon. Here's a big section of aircraft. Looks to me like it might be a door, cargo door or something from the under part of the fuselage that was found on the lawn. Here's another piece. You can see the American Airlines logo painted on it, silver, just like the object that we saw in the video. Here's another piece of an American 757 fuselage out on the lawn, along with lots of other debris that was thrown backward. Here's a worker walking with a piece of the aluminum structure with American Airlines painting on it. Here's a bunch of other photographs of the light stanchion that was knocked over and the various pieces. The landing gear survived. There's some body frame structures with lightning holes. Here's a piece of bent structure with an American Airlines part number on it. Boeing has part numbers. American stamps their own part numbers on them so they can keep track of them. So then I get stuff like, well, what about WTC-7? They reported that it had fallen, but it was still there. Okay, so my question for that is, what do you think that means? I mean, seriously, what do you think that means? Because to me, it doesn't mean anything. Why, if this was all some secret conspiracy and WTC-7 had been set up with bombs to be collapsed deliberately 4 hours later, 5 hours later after the 2 Twin Towers came down, why would they deliberately do that? Maybe the answer is that this person, I mean, look, people are on TV, they're not hired for their brains, they're hired for their looks, especially, I hate to say it, the females. This is just some dingbat reporter that was probably brought on late in the coverage and was told that the other building had collapsed, or they actually believed that, when in fact the reports were going for hours before WTC-7 collapsed that it also was going to collapse. There was no mystery about the fact that it was going to collapse. This is just some stupid reporter saying something wrong in the fog of war on 9/11. And that's all it is. So if you don't believe me, I highly recommend that you go watch a YouTube video from National Geographic that was broadcast about 10 years ago called 9/11 Science and Conspiracy, because it will tell you all about the experiments that were done on steel, how it warps, how much it weakens. The steel at those temperatures, the steel is going to lose 30, 40, 50% of its structural strength, and it probably only needs to lose about 5 or 10% of its structural strength before the whole Twin Tower structure collapses. There are witnesses. There are 9/11 witnesses on YouTube that you can that saw the 757, the plane flying to the Pentagon, the WTC-7 collapse. I don't know if we're showing it. Yeah, are we showing that right now? The WTC7 collapse can be easily explained. Wait a second. Let's see if we've got. So the bottom line is that there is nothing to indicate that the buildings did not simply collapse because of the damage caused by the two jetliners crashing into them. Nothing. And again, go watch the videos. So let's go see what questions we have. Christian, hi. Freya, thank you. Southern states were being taxed to death. That's true. Oh, I look like a lizard. Oh, yeah. I do? No, I don't. Okay, does anybody have any questions? Yes, wars are always about money. My grandfather owned the mill that made all the uniforms for the military in World War II. Yeah, by the way, did you know that there were two armies? There was the official army of the United States, and we had to create a separate corporate army to fight World War II. Okay, anybody have any further questions? Let's see, any questions? Where's the wreckage, the black box? Well, there's plenty of wreckage that was found on 9/11. What are the odds the government was running a training scenario with the exact same premise as the 9/11 attacks on the same day, causing the military to stand down? The military did not stand down. It's not true. The elevator shafts were coated with thermite paint. Yeah, okay. Niall, you've heard all this before. Okay, well, I guess what I would say now, Niall, is believe it. Zero pictures and video from the Pentagon. Zero, no, I just showed you a ton of pictures from the Pentagon. 3D the destroyer, and the video is out there. So there's plenty of surveillance video. Okay, I used to work Flight 77, the one that went to the Pentagon, connected on to this day, both by working Pentagon. Okay. Just one photo of the plane headed toward the Pentagon, but put the conspiracy theory to rest, wouldn't it? Well, no, you have multiple eyewitnesses that saw the airplanes headed toward the Pentagon, plus you have this security video, which shows the airplane headed toward the Pentagon, and you have all the wreckage of the airplane, which shows the airplane hitting the Pentagon. So there's no missile. What about architects and engineers for 9/11 truth? How do you explain their explanation? Okay, I'll explain it. They're fucking idiots. Okay? They are imbeciles of the highest order. They are proof that education and intelligence are two different things. So again, watch National Geographic, 9/11, Science and Conspiracy, because they bring on some of these idiots from architects and engineers for 9/11 truth, and they embarrass them with all the stupid shit that they say that turns out to be completely wrong based on the experiments. And for every one of the architects and engineers that's on that website, I can find you 5 more that 100% disagree with everything they say. And anybody who has any brains can look at the evidence and understand that the planes brought the towers down. That's my statement on architects and engineers for 9/11 truth. They're a bunch of fucking idiots. Yeah, I know a girl who was on I-395 that day in rush hour traffic. She watched the plane pass her on the left side and go to the Pentagon. Okay? Mueller helped cover up 9/11. He did. Robert Mueller was the director of the FBI on 9/11 who allowed this to happen, didn't execute airport security properly, and then helped cover up the Saudi involvement with 9/11. Yeah, Garrett, the planes were basically vaporized. That's what happens to airplanes. Again, go look up some videos of airplanes being flown. There's a great video of an F-4 Phantom, which is a military-grade aircraft, far sturdier and stronger than a commercial jetliner, being flown into a concrete block at 400 miles an hour, basically becomes powder. That's what happens to airplanes. No marks from the wings hitting the building. Yes, first of all, there were marks from the wings hitting the building. It was a wide thing. Secondly, the wings get snapped off because they're flimsy. And then they break up into little pieces. So the wings are not stronger than steel and concrete. So of course they're going to shatter. Yeah, even the news reported how little debris there was. Yeah, that's because they ran into steel and concrete. Epstein's cameras. Cardboard insanity. Mike, you're wrong. No, I'm not wrong. I'm 100% right, and you're wrong. Oh, insurance. Yeah. Okay. Every single building has insurance. That's ridiculous. How much am I being paid and by whom? Nobody. I just have a fucking brain, Greg. You should try growing one. The government is hiding things on the moon and Mars. Also, Barra. No, the government would never lie about 9/11. No, 3D the Destroyer, that's not what I'm saying. They've completely lied to you about why 9/11 happened. What they haven't lied to you about is what happened on 9/11, which is that a bunch of pissed off Muslims flew airplanes into buildings. What do I think about Lazar? Cool story. What about the thermite that was found? Oh, the sparklers? Yeah. There's as far as I know, there's no actual confirmation of that. And thermite is dealt with in 9/11 Science and Conspiracy, so please go watch that. Thanks, Dalek. Why doesn't the government just tell the truth about it then? They are. I mean, again, watch the South Park episode, okay? The South Park episode, the mystery of the urinal deuce, about 9/11. You know, at the end of it, Bush comes in and says, well, why do you want everybody to think that there was a big conspiracy about 9/11? They said, well, because 25% of the country are retards, and they're going to believe all this stuff anyway. So this way, at least we look like we're in control. Have I seen Ryan Dawson's research on 9/11? And if yes, how do you explain it? No, I haven't. Please tell me what it is. I'm sure it's as laughably stupid as the rest of this shit. All the evidence you mentioned is never shown on TV. Again, 9/11 Science and Conspiracy. It was shown on National Geographic. Go watch it. Thank you, Jeff. No impact marks from the wings. There were impact marks from the wings. The hole is actually shaped like this. Again, before it collapsed. Jesus. Where was the fourth plane going before it was brought down? It was either targeted for the White House or the Capitol. Yes, Mueller's a clown. The wing marks. Again, the wings, they hit the building. They were snapped off. They were shattered by all of the debris inside. Well, no, back then planes were made mostly of aluminum, Baxter, so there wouldn't be a lot of stuff left over. But there's a lot of heat for a while after. Yeah, you got a bunch of molten red hot steel that's just going to pile up underneath all that, and it's going to stay really hot. It's not wise to insult your fans. I'm not insulting you. Well, I kind of am. I'm just telling you to wake up. Okay, there are things. Rick, thank you for the super chat. There are things that are worth dying on a hill for in the conspiracy realm. 9/11 being done by bombs and all that shit is not one of them. It's sheer idiocy. And anybody who promotes it is stupid. So don't believe it. Now, what we should be focusing on is why 9/11 happened and why they put us into a war footing. Because they had to. Because of the banks and the money. So, again, I am just so sick and tired of arguing this stuff. And were the hijackers set up by the cabal? Maybe, I don't know. I'm sure somebody had an idea 9/11 was going to happen in the government. You know, I would assume so. But that's what we should be discussing, not, oh, they secretly put bombs in the buildings and they were brought down by controlled demolition. No, they weren't. They were hit by 350,000 pound jetliners, 350,000 ton jetliners flying at 400 miles an hour, full of fuel. That's what brought them down. And again, I don't think bringing the buildings down was necessarily even part of the plan. It wasn't even necessary to put us on a war footing. So yes, we're still broke, Jimmy. At some point, there will be a reset of currencies, and everything will work itself out. Now, another thing I can highly recommend is going to, let me see if I can do this. Nah, it's not going to work. There's videos I would search, eyewitness accounts of the attack on the Pentagon. I would search a presentation called In Fact, Building 7 Did Not Look Like a Controlled Demolition, because this is, again, a myth that is constantly perpetuated. God, Twilight, what about building number 7? I'm going to strangle you, seriously. I'm seriously going to strangle some people. Yeah, I'm worried about false flags as we get closer to the election. So, again, I'm passionate about this because I've been dealing with it now for almost 20 years. And, again, I knew the buildings were going to come down. As a structural engineer, and I think most structural engineers, understood when they saw the damage of the buildings that they were going to come down probably within 15 or 20 minutes of seeing the impact. And a lot of people who aren't engineers keep perpetuating this BS. And the reason why it needs to stop is because that's not what happened. And when we get behind that and pretend like that's the truth, it makes us look like idiots. And the reason I'm so mad at some of you is because you're making me look like an idiot. And I'm not an idiot. These other people are. So walk away from that. Again, what matters is the truth. And the truth is a bunch of pissed off Muslims somehow got through airport security, hijacked airplanes, and flew them into buildings on 9/11. And that's what got us into the war. The war that I think President Trump is trying to finally get us out of. I mean, the reason John Bolton was fired yesterday, it was not a coincidence he was fired the day before 9/11. It's because of their disagreement about Afghanistan. So with Afghanistan, we need to do one of two things. Either end the war. I've talked to troops on the ground, people that have been there. They said the whole thing could be over in 3 months if they would just let us go in and kill the guys. But you'd probably lose 20 or 30,000 civilians if we did it that way. Either do that and get out, or just leave the place, wall it in, and let them kill each other. So 9/11 is a significant event. It's probably the most significant event in the history of this generation. And it needs to be treated with some respect for the dead. If planes were not flown into buildings, if it was a missile, what happened to all the people that were on the plane? What happened to Barbara Jordan, wife of the Solicitor General? I think it was Barbara Jordan. She was a TV commentator. She was killed in the Pentagon plane. Where'd she go? And there's just so much nonsense out there from people I otherwise love and respect. It has to end. Okay, the buildings came down because of the damage the plane did to them. It's that simple. I gotta go. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for putting up with my frustration. And probably with all the curse words I put out, this video is going to be demonetized anyway. So thanks a lot. I'll see you next week, and hopefully I'll be in a better mood. So thanks. Good night.